Hi, welcome to my whole body migraine assessment call. My name is Dr. Tanya Paynter. I'm a naturopathic doctor who I really love to dig into the symptoms, the whole body symptoms that somebody with migraines experiences to help point us in the right direction as far as what might be causing their migraines. And once we get a clearer picture of what their individual migraine symptomology looks like, we can really kind of hone in on those problem areas that need to be worked on in order to get them healing and to actually move them forward in their migraine-free search. So this is my way of helping people that I don't get a chance to work with to really figure out some of the things that might be going on. And so if this is your first one, welcome. So let's just jump into who we've got today. So today we are going to be talking about Jenny. So Jenny sent me her information, and this is what she shared with us. So she has been having migraines for a very long time, and she has about 1 to 5 a month. She usually wakes with one. She has one in the afternoon. Those are the two most common times that she gets one. She knows that she is triggered by histamine food, so she's already on a low histamine diet. She has several IBS symptoms and maybe even an actual IBS diagnosis. She says definitely IBS. So whether or not she's been diagnosed officially or not, she does have IBS symptoms. She has dark circles under her eyes. She gets migraines around ovulation or shortly after in that time frame, and her migraines were worse during pregnancy. She also will get migraines at the beginning of her menstrual cycle. So when she actually starts her period, she has weather shifts will trigger her migraines. And she notes that Topamax really helped, but made her just kind of feel too goofy. She couldn't stay on it. So these are some great observations, great information here. Lots of things for us to look at and make sure that has been ruled out. So first of all, waking with one, very common for people to wake up with one. The most common reasons for waking with a migraine is undiagnosed sleep apnea. So that's something that should be looked at and considered, especially if you have any other warning signs of sleep apnea. So if you snore, if you wake up ever gasping for breath, if you are fatigued all day long or kind of feel like you nod off because you're so tired, if you wake with headaches, if you are overweight, that's a risk factor. If you have bite marks on your tongue, like your tongue is like you're biting on the edges of your tongue, so they're scalloped. So those things, if you have any of those or a combination of those, sleep apnea would be very important to rule out as an underlying cause. Low cortisol and low serotonin. So cortisol and serotonin are lowest in the morning. And then it's supposed to start on waking, you're supposed to have your cortisol start spiking. And sometimes that doesn't happen. And so that low cortisol can actually set us up for, migraines. The afternoon ones, so again, there's a commonality with cortisol, low cortisol, because naturally speaking, our bodies will spike in the morning and drop in the afternoon until it kind of tails off into evening time. And that's a typical pattern to help kind of get us going for the day. But what can happen is if we don't have that spike properly, or if we do have it and then it drops, and our body, when we're triggered by cortisol drops, that can be a big trigger for migraine. So naturally, we see it in the afternoon when our migraines start to, or our cortisol starts to drop. It can also be related to stress. So I've said multiple times in multiple different episodes here that when we have higher stress, especially if we're at work and we have stress in the morning, then that will trigger afternoon migraines because our catecholamines, our cortisol levels, all of those things are starting to rise, and that can actually trigger migraines for us. And then I also tend to see dietary triggers can be part of an afternoon triggered migraine. So if there's something that we ate in the morning for breakfast that our body just doesn't like, we can see it triggering a migraine at night or in the afternoon and nighttime. So it can be one of those things where maybe pay attention. I see this very, very commonly with eggs. If you eat eggs for breakfast, then a lot of times I will hear that around, lunchtime or 2 o'clock, somewhere in, the noon to 2 range, they'll start having a headache that will just progressively get worse. And a lot of times we can track it back to something they ate in the morning. So that's what the timing of the migraines tells us. So let's talk about the histamine and IBS symptoms. So you're already on a low histamine diet, so that's great. And I don't know if you started yet addressing the gut inflammation that came from eating high histamine foods when high histamine foods are triggering you. So that means that those high histamine foods are inflammatory. They're going to be causing some IBS stuff as a result of the inflammation and kind of the lack of integrity that your gut now has. Might have been caused by the histamine, might have been caused by something else. Who knows at this point? But being on the low histamine diet is a great start. Then you need to work on starting to heal the gut up so that you don't have the that inflammation anymore. And if you've listened to my any of my other videos, I mentioned this a lot: the connection between the gut-brain barrier, or the gut-brain connection, and that has to do with how our body is able to produce serotonin. About 90% of our serotonin is actually made in the gut, not in the brain. So when we have a lack of serotonin that could be contributing to our migraines, we always look at the gut first to see, all right, is there something going on there that's interfering with your body's ability to produce serotonin properly? So that's going to be one thing to take a look at. The other is she mentioned that she has some DAO mutations. So DAO, diamine oxidase, the gene of that enzyme can be mutated in families, which means that there tends to be histamine or allergies running in the families. And so if you aren't able to break it down because that enzyme isn't working properly, then you can start seeing a lot of allergy type symptoms, and that can be a contributing factor to migraines. So, so there are things that you can do as far as supplemental, and Jenny has mentioned that she knows about that, but they are pretty cost prohibitive. So there are things though that you can do to help support the DAO gene without actually taking supplemental DAO. So there's a wonderful book by Dr. Ben Lynch. He is very, very knowledgeable on the genetics and epigenetics, on working to bring people's when they have mutations in their genes that aren't working properly. There's a lot of research about how we can better support it and make them work to the optimum capacity. So he's got a book called Dirty Genes, and it's available on Amazon. No affiliation. It's just a wonderful book. And there is information in there about the DAO gene and how you can support it through nutrition and supplemental things. So that could be something that could be helpful. She notes that she has dark circles under her eyes. So this is very likely related to part of the immune piece. It might be histamine related, but it's the dark circles under the eyes. They're called allergic shiners. And that usually indicates that there is a food reaction or food sensitivity that maybe you haven't figured out yet. Because if you're having issues with histamine, the histamine issue can kind of cover up any food sensitivities that you might have going on that could be contributing to some of that. So there are ways that you can do some IgG or IgA or IgM food testing. My absolute favorite one is called ELISA biotechnologies, and it has like 66 or 70 different foods, and then a bunch of environmental things and some chemicals that could be we were exposed to in drinking water and things like that. So it's a pretty comprehensive test, really wonderful. I like it a lot because it's not just looking at IgG, which can be somewhat inaccurate. This looks at it's a lymphocytic response assay, which is looking at how the white blood cells themselves are responding. And I find that it's actually much more limited in the number of foods that come back as reactive. So instead of having a list of 25 things, you usually only have 4 or 5, but these ones are things that your body is really reacting to. So I find it to be very helpful without being overwhelming. So that could be also something to look for as well. And again, the IBS symptoms might be related to the histamine. So I don't know if you're doing any fermented foods or probiotics to help with gut healing, but if you are, you have to be careful which ones you use, because those can actually really increase your histamine response, which can actually be doing more damage than it is helping. So just be aware of that. All right, so now let's talk about the migraines around ovulation or shortly after your period starts, and migraines worse with pregnancy. So these 3 pieces here, ovulation right after your period starts, those are both times where our estrogen drops. So big red flag there. And then migraines worse with pregnancy. In pregnancy, our progesterone goes way up. It's how we keep our pregnancy viable. And so if most women's migraines get better during pregnancy, the fact that yours got worse tells me that you've got some low estrogen issues going on, because then when your progesterone levels did go up during pregnancy, your body saw that as a further drop in estrogen, and that caused those ongoing migraines until you gave birth, which I'm so sorry. That sounds horrible. 9 months of migraines. It's awful. So if you haven't had your hormones tested yet, Jenny, that definitely needs to be done. And especially look at your estrogen levels. Don't let that, they might fall in the normal range, but if your progesterone is in, the upper or middle of the range and your estrogen is way low on the like it's barely in normal, that's not right. That relationship, that estrogen progesterone balance is off. And so you can't just look at, am I in normal range? I'm okay. You have to look at it from a functional standpoint, and your body sees it as a deficiency because you've got more progesterone than estrogen in that ratio. Hopefully that makes sense. The other thing that could potentially be happening around your period part, if it's not strictly related to estrogen, but we tend to drop iron. So just make sure that you've had a CBC to check for anemia, and make sure that you've had an iron panel done and you're looking for, good, normal, solid, upper normal range iron and ferritin levels, because if those drop, then they tend to, if they're low, then they tend to be even lower after or, during our period when we're actively bleeding, because we're losing the blood, and then that iron drops even further as your body's trying to rebuild that blood, and that iron deficiency can lead to migraines that get worse after periods. So that's a really important piece to consider. All right, 2 more things that we're going to kind of dive into a little bit deeper here with what I shared earlier. So the weather shifts. Based on some of your other symptoms, family history of depression, all that kind of stuff, serotonin is most likely the reason why those weather shifts are triggering you. So you're having drops in serotonin, which is the most common reason for a weather triggered migraine. It can be from some other things, but from your history, I'm suspecting that it's probably related to serotonin drops. And again, that can kind of come back to some of the genetics. I don't know. I don't remember seeing anything about MAOA. I know that you have MTHFR, but I don't know about MAOA or COMT. I would be curious to see, based on what we just talked about with estrogen possibly being low, COMT, if it's working too fast, will drop estrogen too quickly. And COMT working too fast will also get rid of serotonin too quickly. And so I'm suspecting you have a mutation or possibly a double mutation in the COMT gene, and that it's working too fast, which is contributing to some of the imbalances that you've got going on. And then you said that Topamax helped, but it just made you feel weird. So GABA support and glutamate balance are going to be really important. So taking a look at high glutamate foods, making sure that you're avoiding them as much as possible. And if you can certainly try supplementing with GABA, but this is a very tight rope to walk, because GABA can turn directly into glutamate. And if your body is already doing that too much, supplementing with GABA is going to cause the glutamates to increase as well, which can actually backfire. So it's one of those things where you can certainly give it a try. I'd start on a very low dose, the lowest that you can find of the GABA, and then just kind of play with it and see, does it make you feel better? Does it make you feel worse? But too much too quickly is almost guaranteed to make you feel worse. So if you are going to play with it, first, I would recommend that you talk to your doctor about it and do it with them first. But if you're just going to go off on your own, definitely start at the lowest possible dose you can find, and then slowly work your way up, because we don't want to throw that all out of whack. All right, so I think that brings us to the end of Jenny. Hopefully you found that helpful, Jenny. And for everybody else, I always like to end these with understanding that we don't want to just eliminate our triggers. We need to identify them. Sure, we need to eliminate them in the short term, but we have to work on healing the body, because if we don't, then what ends up happening? The same thing that's probably happened to you all the way up until you watching this video right now is you feel better for a short period of time, but then the migraines start coming back. And it's because the imbalances haven't actually been addressed. You've just eliminated things that are causing problems in one area. So you got rid of that. Well, now the body is like, okay, well, this is out over here. So now we're starting to have migraines as a result of this being off, right? So we have to work on healing the body up so that you can actually start to reintroduce foods, reintroduce, the high histamine foods, reintroduce the foods that you've maybe eliminated up until now. And by approaching migraines with this 3-step process, the evaluate, eliminate, and alleviate, or healing, then it's extremely effective in treating and managing the migraines to the point where you can live an almost normal life, like within reason. I don't get to go out and eat, gluten cakes all the time, but if I want to have a slice of birthday cake at my son's friend's party, I can do that without negative consequences now. So, there is something to be said about working on the healing aspect. So if you are interested in having your own whole body assessment done, you can click the link below and choose your time. It is done just like this with a video. You don't have to schedule a time that works for you, because it's all going to be done through video, and then you'll be notified when your video is going to be posted. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the approach that I use for migraines, then you can also watch my free training, which is also linked in the description below. So until next time.